our officers, but first to say welcome to, if there's anybody in the public gallery, and welcome to members of the press. Our officers today, we have Mr. Russell Chick, the Planning Development Manager, Mr. Oliver Bolter, as Strategic Manager for Planning and Infrastructure, Mr. Neil Troughton, who is the Highways Representative for Island Roads, Mr. Ben Gard, our Legal Advisor, Mr. Regan Matthews, our Trainee Legal Advisor, Ms. Marie Bartlett, our Committee Clerk, Councillor Paul Fuller, who is the Cabinet Member for Planning and Enforcement. There are no planned fire drills during this meeting, so if you hear the fire alarm sound, please treat it as a real emergency and evacuate the building via the nearest safe escape route. That escape route is via the signposted set of stairs to your left as you leave the council chamber or the public gallery. Please exit via the door at the back of the building, walk across the inner car park around the building to the evacuation point, which is the pavement opposite the police station. Lifts can't be used in the event of an emergency, and please don't re-enter the building until you're advised that it's safe to do so by a council member of staff. If anyone has any mobile phones, if you could switch that to off or to mute, and for all speakers to use the microphones. And for members, as they will doubtless be aware, not to leave the council chamber during the presentation or the debate of an application, and if they do leave, then that you will be unable to vote. Members of the public, to remind you that you're simply here to observe the process. We'll now run through the lighting system. So when the you will speak when the green light displays, and then you have 30 seconds left, and the amber light will flash, and then the red light will display, and I will stop you from speaking. Excellent. So we have a shortened agenda, but let's first move to apologies. We have apologies from Councillor Vanessa Churchman and Councillor Oliver. I believe there are no other changes in membership unless anybody knows otherwise. We move then to the previous meeting minutes. Are there any comments, addendums, or questions surrounding those? In which case, could I have a proposer and seconder, Councillor Quirk, and a seconder, Councillor Bacon? Thank you very much. All in favour? Thank you. And against? Carried. Thank you. I will just sign those. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations? Councillor Bacon.
Thank you, Chair. I feel I should declare that I am a member of the AONB Steering Committee and have been for some time. And I note that the AONB partnership was an objector to the application we're due to consider. I have taken advice, and while I'm declaring the interest, it does not remove me from the meeting, I understand.
Thank you. I'm certainly happy with that. Any other declarations? Yes, Councillor Stewart.
I also follow Councillor Bacon. I'm not exhausted. I haven't just run up the stairs, I promise. I'm also a member of the steering group for AONB. I also do not feel that that precludes me from taking part in this planning meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Spink.
Just the one that I always declare. I'm a member of the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England. It doesn't preclude me at all from sitting, but it is something that I'm a member of.
If there are no others, then we will proceed to public question time. I can't see if there are any members in the public gallery, but are there any online? No. In which case we move to which is the planning report. Councillor Bacon.
Apologies for interrupting at this point, Chair. Before we go forward considering this matter, there seems to be a rather fundamental issue in us considering it, which appears in paragraph 7.37 of the papers. We have page 101 of the bundle. And I feel I must raise it because the phrase there, which appears to be stated as fact, not opinion, is, however, fundamentally, the council is also unable to lawfully grant planning permission for the development, ... And I just wonder if that is the statement of fact in this report, why we are going through this process, put it plain and simply. And if we could have some guidance on that, I'd be very interested.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Bay. I think that's a valid point. My understanding essentially is that this is about the two competing regimes, that it is technically within the gift of planning committee, subject to discussion and obviously voting to allow this to be approved, notwithstanding the fact the separate regime of the habitats regulations would be potentially at odds with that. So it is essentially a matter of discretion, that the planning committee's discretion is broad, but ultimately it would come into contrast and conflict with that separate statutory regime. But I will defer to Mr. Bolter, if you don't mind, for a little more lucidity and clarification than I can provide. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. No, to endorse what you've just set out, I would also give my apologies if it isn't as clear as it should have been, but I would invite members of the planning committee to read paragraphs 7.36 and 7.37 together with that opening statement in 7.36, which is that officers conclude. And that conclusion extends through paras 7.36 through to 7.37. And as such, the content of 7.37 is the advice that officers will be giving members of the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bolter. Does that go to answering your question, Councillor Bacon?
We're being asked to exercise our discretion to make a lawful decision or an unlawful one.
I think in this situation, it is one of those grey areas or lacunas which is causing difficulty. I think I would certainly say that the way in which this has been expressed in the report perhaps should be possibly looked at. But I think we do find ourselves in this somewhat odd paradox. And on that basis, I'm content to proceed, unless anyone wishes to say anything. Councillor Jones-Evans.
Well, it just brings to mind, given this paragraph and this the technical, the legal status of, is that, you know, if it is proven that we are making a legal, potentially making an illegal decision, are we then personally liable for that as members of the committee, as individuals?
Thank you, Councillor Jones. As my understanding would be that we are not, but I will certainly defer to Mr. Garda as our principal lawyer on that matter. If you're happy to speak to that.
No, I can't speak to all of the scenarios as to what might happen once the item comes before you. In the ordinary course of events, discharge of a function that you have, members of this council are indemnified by the council for its actions. And so in the normal course of events, the discharge of a function that you're doing in good faith would not attract liability for your decisions. The point Councillor Bacon raises is a good one. The advice of officers coming into the meeting is that this item is before you with a recommendation for approval, and it is the advice for refusal. Sorry, that's right. I'd be very careful. Thank you. Refusal, and the reasons for that are identified in the report, and to do otherwise, so to approve, is where I was going. The advice of officers will be that would be unlawful in the circumstances. And so I think if we turn to the report, you'll find out the reasons why officers are recommending it for refusal, which will expand upon the points that are raised in the report.
Mr. Bolter.
Thank you, Chair. And just to add to one final point, as councillors may well be aware, ultimately the application in front of us is for council purposes. So as such, through the council's code of practice for officers and members dealing with planning matters, we have to bring it to committee. It is unfortunate, I think, that it's ended up being the sole agenda item because of the nature of it, but apologies for that. But that is also one of the other key reasons of why it's in front of you today.
Thank you, Mr. Bolter. I think on this basis, I'm going to proceed with the presentation. I think it will be for committee members to make a determination as to how they wish to vote, or indeed, of course, they do not have to vote. This is something of a dilemma, I certainly concede, but I think it is for members of planning committee to decide how best to vote on that. Councillor Spink.
Chair, I don't want to be difficult, but it does seem to me that if the advice is to vote for permission would be unlawful, we only have one option. And we couldn't pass it, we couldn't vote for, given the advice that so to do would be unlawful. So I don't know really if as much need is there for a presentation. If it's unlawful to vote for, we're compelled to either abstain or vote against, are we not?
Thank you, Councillor Spink. It's a valid point. I'm going to consult with our strategic manager and principal lawyer, and we'll call the meeting to a brief caesura currently. But perhaps it is an opportune moment to say for anybody who is watching at home that the Bembridge application has been withdrawn by the applicant. So for anyone who is not aware, we are solely focused on the second agenda item in relation to the military road. Well, apologies, committee. I've taken some advice from officers. It would seem that we are empowered, we are allowed to move forward straight to the vote if committee members feel that they have sufficient information. Essentially, the presentation is a further exploration of what is in the report. So unless there are any points of clarification that the committee would like to seek from officers, we can move to the vote. However, there is still an element of public speaking, and so that would come before any potential debate or vote. So unless yes, Councillor Price.
Chairman, I think we should definitely have the full presentation as we normally would. I think it would be a real break from tradition to do anything differently. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Price. Councillor Brodie.
Yes, I would endorse what Councillor Price says. There is some public interest in this as well, and I think it's incumbent upon us to proceed with this application in the way we would be expected to, and to make a decision therefore. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. In which case we will proceed with the presentation. So I shall defer to Mr. Van Cullenberg when you are ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So, councillors, the application for you relates to a section of the military road known as Site 14. I've indicated the location of the proposed pile wall, which is the proposed development, which is to the southwest of the Coast Guard cottages at Brook, to the west of the Brook Chine National Trust car park, and to the north west of the Brook Green and the housing around that. And members would have noted the old life station walls there. The other feature to note on this map is the public footpaths, and we have BS 51, which runs north to south towards the Military Road, and the coastal footpath, which will be part of the forthcoming National Trail, BS 98, which is part of the Island Coastal Path. I'll just have a look at the proposed site area. The site area is actually in red. The blue lines here to north and south are the extent of the highway verge to north and south of the road. And the yellow line here, which is fairly faint, is the line, again, repeated from the previous photograph, which shows the position of the proposed piled wall. And this yellow area here is the indicated area of site compound. It's worth saying that all the works proposed during construction are to be carried out within the public highway. Just some photos for members to appreciate, again, as a reminder of where we are. So this yellow line here replicates the position of the proposed pile wall, which will be on the carriageway edge, southern carriageway edge, within an area of former highway lay-by. And we have the old an embankment, which was constructed in around about 2011, following the original cliff failure in 2010. And again, for members, again, I've got some images here that just say where photos 1 through 3 were taken. So photograph 1 is taken looking to the west. Photograph 3 down the bottom here is taken from the National Trail, which has moved further inland following the cliff failure. Again, looking at the area here for the site 14. Cliff failure, again, this photo gives a better look down into the cliff area. And then photograph 2 here, looking the other direction towards Brook Green and to the Coast Guard cottages to the north. This image shows the extent of the former lay-by area, and the blue area is the proposed piled wall area in relation to that. And over here is the photograph that shows the state of the site in 2010, when it was temporarily closed and made single carriageway when they undertook some drainage works and some remedial works to that carriageway, which resulted in the earth berm being constructed over that lay-by to ensure vehicles didn't park too close to the cliff edge. In terms of the proposed construction of the piled wall, effectively it's constructed through some smaller secant piles. These are the piles in the middle here, and there are some bigger contiguous piles that are constructed afterwards. So the primary piles are 300 diameter, they're filled with bentonite, and they are over-drilled then by these larger contiguous piles, which are 900 in diameter, and they effectively form a continuous wall with the bentonite proposed to seal the wall to effectively prevent groundwater from washing out material underneath the road. In terms of the construction, again, the piling would go down 5 metres for the secant piles, which are these middles and piles in the middle here. The contiguous piles actually go down 21.7 metres in depth. So members will note from the profiling here that we have the existing cliff profile through here, and this is carriageway level, and effectively the pile structure goes all the way down through down below beach level into geology, and it's actually capped with this pile cap here, which is concrete, which is about 0.78 metres in depth, 1.2 metres wide, and would span for 26 metres, which is the width of the actual proposed wall. This is an indicative detail to soften the impact of the wall. So it's actually proposed to recreate the earth bund over the pile cap, which is shown here, and then to actually grade that into the existing slip profile. And then this is an indicative bramble planting, which the idea of that is that it would trail over. So as the wall is exposed, that would help to soften the impact of the walls of the wall within the cliff face. It's an image taken from the applicant's landscape visual impact assessment. So this shows currently the hollow at site 14, and members will note the footpath that we walked on site, and how close now it is coming to the carriageway. So it's now coming within 5 metres of the carriageway. And the image below shows effectively what the pile wall may look like, exposed 5 metres, 4 to 6 metres in depth, I think that image shows. And the idea is that those piles would be coloured to help soften that impact within the cliff face, to reduce the visual impact. The proposed pile wall is proposed to provide temporary protection measures to isolate the road from a cliff failure. the premise of the application is that the design life of that wall would have 3 trigger points. The first trigger point is that a single pile of that wall would be exposed in the cliff face up to 5 meters. A third trigger point for removal of this wall would be if the piling at Afton were to have to be removed or to fail. And the third trigger point is that the road is threatened at other places, which effectively would make the road closed, and therefore that would also trigger the requirement to remove this structure. The images in front of members 1 through 9, 1 through 8, effectively is showing a staged process for how the applicant may be able to take the wall out. And effectively what that shows is that the concrete pile cap, if that is exposed or even if it's not exposed, would have to be broken out, and that would be removed and taken away to landfill. And then ultimately the shorter secant piles would be removed by a pile by the piles, and then a pile cropper would be brought in to actually crop the longer piles 5 meters down. In order to enable that to happen, there would need to be creation of access ramps, as shown by this red indication here, which would enable plant to access the lower part of those piles from the landward side. And that would involve having to effectively excavate down the cliff and actually reprofile the cliff to enable safe access to do the removal work. Now, it's also proposed that once the next section of the deeper piles is exposed by 5 meters, that the applicant would then need to come back and remove the next 5 meters of that piling, repeating that process. And members will note that to do that, the extent of access and cliff reprofiling that would need to be done to access and remove that next 5 meters. And as members will note, that extends beyond the site boundary into agricultural lands currently in the ownership of the National Trust. And members will note on this image, just for reference, this is where public footpath BS51 is. Okay. So that is the general process put forward for decommissioning of the wall. And as the report sets out, there is no defined life for how long this wall may be in place. It's very much dependent upon how long it would take for either the road to fail at various points, or how long it would take for the wall itself to be exposed within the cliff face, with a pile being exposed up to 5 meters. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. We now proceed to the public speaking part of the application, and we have Councillor Cox, who is going to speak on behalf of our speaker, Mr. John Cerrone, on behalf of Brystone Parish. Councillor Cox is a member of Planning Committee as the IWalk representative, and she is a non-voting member for anyone watching at home. Councillor Cox.
It was Brystone Parish Council in 2017 who first raised concerns regarding how close the cliff edge was to the military road in the location being discussed today, being just 6 meters at that time. A meeting was arranged by Steve Hastings at the time to discuss the concerns. Councillor Cerrone from Brystone Parish Council attended along with all stakeholders present to look at the best solution. It was not until 2019 that a second meeting was arranged. Again, Councillor Cerrone attended and 3 options to save the military road were discussed. The solution being discussed today was the least preferred option. The other 2 solutions were building a movable bridge which could be moved as the cliff erodes into chine. The other option, rerouting the road inland. Councillor Cerrone stated at the meeting in 2019 the cliff was also very close to the road further along the military road, being only 19 metres away just past Compton Car Park. That distance is now only 13 metres. Rerouting the road was always been the preferred option as the road could fail in other locations, and there is currently support locally within the National Trust for that option to be pursued. Brystone Parish Council's most recent submission to the Planning Department, when asked to comment, is on the proposal being discussed today, is as below.
Thank you, Councillor Cox, on behalf of Mr. John Cerrone of Brystone Parish Council. That is the end of public speaking. So we move to any questions from members of the committee. Yes, Councillor Stewart.
as the local member, I'm not going to say a great deal this time. It's an iconic asset for the UK and the Isle of Wight. The local tourist organisation can't believe we would let this vanish. The community desperately want to keep it, while the existing local lanes couldn't cope with the traffic. The island generally needs it as a key access road, given there are only 3 roads through to West Wight. However, you have the report here of a number of organisations who point out the major damage that this particular scheme, which is what we're looking at, would cause to the geology, to the scenery, to the botany. That's quite important to me, but generally to the wildlife as well. We have something which is quite special on the South Coast. Many of us, in fact, I would suggest that probably most of us have been there relatively recently at one time or another. Other people have been there as well. This option is not an appropriate option, given that all of the key consultees, bar one, are clearly saying that it is not meeting the requirements and is unlikely to ever meet those requirements. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? In which case, we'll move to the debate part. I would anticipate that it will be fairly brief, but I wouldn't wish to be tendential. Councillor Quirk.
It's pretty apparent that we can't approve this legally. Even if we could approve it legally, it would be inappropriate to approve it because it doesn't meet the agreed policy with the Environment Agency for allowing the coastal erosion along this stretch of the island. And it has objections from virtually all of the consultees. So, I mean, I think it's quite obvious we have to decline it, and I would move that we accept the officer recommendation and refuse.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. So we have a proposal to refuse the application. Is there a seconder? Councillor Honore, thank you. In which case, all in favour of the proposal to refuse this application?
Sorry, is no one else allowed to speak?
Well, technically, I think as there is a motion on the floor, we are going to move to vote, but I think I'm very happy to allow you to speak, Councillor Price, because you are always very wise. Councillor Price.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you know, publicly, this is going to come across as us voting against saving the military road, which of course it isn't that. But we are voting against an option to keep the military road in use. And in the absence of another alternative from Island Roads, which I guess is where the problem lies, really. The military road is a significant asset, as we all know. And I wonder if we leave Brook Chine to fail while further debates carry on, we'll just end up with the military road closed, won't we? With no alternative route except back into Brook, and you know, and the other surrounding villages, as Councillor Stewart just said. You know, I realise why this is here for refusal, and I do understand all the reasons for it, but I find it quite hard to vote against the principle of doing major works to keep the military road in use. And I think it would be looked at outrageously by the public that anyone would vote against an option to keep the military road in use. You know, we've got, I mean, I hope Island Roads are on the case going forward. You know, when you think of Compton Chine and Compton Farm and the south of Afton Down, you know, those areas where, you know, surely there must be a long-term solution to some of those and not just looking at more, you know, 21-metre piles to save it. You know, there must be other options, rerouting the road and so on. I think it's, you know, really concerning that this is the only option that they've actually come up with. And I would hazard a guess that it's down to cost. You know, but I don't know how much it costs to put in 21-foot piles, but I would say, you know, probably a few £1 million, I would imagine. And with all the equipment and all the other things that will need to be done while this work's being carried out. And I mean, are we allowed to ask the representative from Island Road whether alternatives have been explored? Are we likely to see another alternative? Because I think they're relevant things that I would like to know tonight. And if they're not, why aren't they looking at those alternatives? We've heard other, the local member mention things, but we've also heard the speech from the chairman of Brighton Parish Council. You know, if those other options have been discussed, why don't we have any more information relating to why they're not even considered at this stage? So, you know, I would like to hear from Island Roads and whether Mr. Bolter can fill in some of those gaps. You know, I know it's an opinion, and it would be going grossly against officers' recommendations, considering all the reasons for rejection. But I think yeah, we have a real duty to protect the military road. The worst thing that's happened while I've been on this council is not reinstating Undercliff Drive. I mean, that is an absolute, it's a crazy situation. There should have been some solution put in place to save Undercliff Drive. And are we, you know, just letting this pass us by with no further option, and then 3 years' time the military road fails and that's the end of it? Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a valid point, and I would agree that it is regrettable that an application hasn't come forth that is perhaps closer to what might be considered an easier approval from the perspective of committee. I am going to allow you to ask your question to Mr. Troughton. So I'm going to put him on notice, but in the time being, I'm going to defer to Councillor Critchison, as she also has a comment to make, and Councillor Andre, and perhaps Mr. Bolter, if you wish to make any comment as well. But Councillor Critchison.
Similar comments to Councillor Price, really. That obviously it's a lifeline in my ward, and it's, you know, adjacent to Councillor Stewart's ward, that people, you know, in the south of the island, we use that. That is our road to the ferry at Yarmouth. That is to get around all of our villages, and to see all that traffic go into the small villages would be unacceptable, because they wouldn't be able to put up with it. So that would have just as much costs on top of it as well, making those roads safe for people in the villages, and we would see so much damage to those areas. So to say no to something, to say no to saving this road, is super, super hard, because, you know, I've got to think of all those people that would be really affected by it. So it's the same. I want the same answers really that Councillor Price does, as to why we're not having a much more acceptable option in front of us. People don't want to see this. They don't want to see the road go, but they don't want to see this option. They want to see a rerouting. And why are we not having that in front of us? With so many questions have been brought out by this report here, it brings up more questions than it answers. That's for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Critchison. Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chair. I don't disagree with what Councillors Price and Critchison has said, but I think the reasons they've put forward for effectively the protection of this area, which is what we all want, can equally be used to support the officer's recommendation of refusal. As a planning committee, we're here to consider the application in front of us. And sometimes I think there's obviously reasons that this application has been brought forward, but sometimes in the refusal of an application, it encourages alternatives to come forward. So I can see both sides. I think we're all on the same page, in as much as it's absolutely vital that we do preserve and protect this route, but not at the cost of the environment. I think it has to be the right long-term solution, and we're here to consider the application in front of us. And I, for one, will go with the officer's recommendation to refuse.
Thank you, Councillor Andre. Councillor Jones-Evans.
Just quickly, thank you, Chair. I think some valid points have been raised, especially from the public's perception, who may not understand why this has come here, and the only option we have as a committee is to refuse it. think that's pretty plain from what we've heard this afternoon. But so it's the communication that is really, really key on this. What does happen next? So I think whether that's going to come from the council planning team, via the cabinet member, I don't know who's going to be getting this message out, but we have to be really clear with communicating to residents, because, you know, as everyone said this this afternoon, this is a critical road, not only for our island, you know, for us getting around and the life in the south of the island, but also it is the money shot. It is absolute iconic view, and people love to drive along it. It's part of what makes the island the island. So, you know, that's why, you know, this route was chosen as part of the finale for the sadly not to happen tour of Britain. But, you know, it's just stunning, and we have to do everything we can to preserve it, or understand that maybe this is not possible, but there will be another separate route. We're going a new road going round, and then this will be then, I think we discussed before, you know, for cycling and walking, and a beautiful, sustainable travel area. So it's the communication. I know I'm straying from this particular what's in front of us, but the communication is absolutely key. I think, as Councillor Price really put that into you know, very well, that we have to let our residents know that this is important.
Councillor Jones-Evans, I think I share the committee's frustration without wishing to stray into an area that's too political. I think, given that this is something that Planning Committee has to consider, that it is essentially within the aegis of the Isle of Wight Council, it's going to come before us. And if it falls so far short of that particular threshold of acceptability, then it is potentially a waste of public resource, which is somewhat irksome to say the least. But I will defer to Mr. Bolter first, and then I'll bring in Mr. Troughton, not to want to put you too much on the spot. Mr. Bolter.
Thank you, Chair. I think I would just ask councillors to remember that we're here to consider the application, the proposal in front of us. I'm sure we could all speculate and come up with a range of other solutions. However, they are not what is in front of us to consider. I think as well to refuse this, because let's be honest, your officers have struggled with this application as well, for all the sort of reasons that you've already been discussing. So to arrive at a conclusion that we have was also quite a challenge for us. But I think I would certainly take the view to that if members were minded to refuse this application, that isn't to making a statement that disagrees with the principle of keeping the road. It is merely making a decision in relation to the proposed solution in front of you. There, I'm sure, will be other solutions that could well be considered and explored by the appropriate parties. Just on the point around sort of Island Road's views, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn on Neil's behalf, but what I would say is that Neil is here as a representative of Island Roads as a highways engineer, and to advise on the details of proposals in front of you. If he's got long legs, he will kick me under the table if I'm incorrect when I say this, but I'm not aware that Neil has been involved in either of the strategic level sort of preparation of options through to detailed design work in front of us. Indeed, I would wonder out loud, as if he had been, that would have compromised the position for him to be here with you this evening and to offer advice on the details if needs be. So I would suggest, actually, Chair, that it would be unfair and inappropriate to put Mr. Troughton on the spot and ask him the question, but that would just be my view. And also, I'm sure, picking up Councillor Jones-Evans' point, that colleagues across the council, remembering that the council wears many hats, but I'm sure our colleagues, and indeed I can see some of our colleagues in the Communities Directorate and the Highways Authority, are watching this meeting with interest, and I'm sure picking up on the messages coming from the committee in terms of the discussion to date. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bolter. Well, I think the concerns the committee have raised have been noted and ventilated. I do feel that it is somewhat unfair to put Mr. Troughton on the spot, particularly where he's here in the capacity to advise us from a more technical perspective. So that said, I would, however, invite any members, if they have a technical question that they wish to ask Mr. Troughton, they can certainly do that. But I think otherwise, I would simply say, are there any other points that the committee wish to make? Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, subject, before we go to a vote, there is just something else I'd like to say that could be an option. It's not an amendment or anything, but it is just something that maybe could be built into the decision, maybe.
I think that's a fair point. Did you want to propose a particular motion or?
No, well, what I was going to suggest is if the concern for me is this might be our only option. If this is our only option and we knew this was our only option, then it would be absurd of me to vote for refusal. Okay. But with all the other information that officers have prepared, which clearly is all policy based, all of the different policies and consultees have all contributed to it in their normal way. I've read and tried to understand as much of it as I can. I don't think personally so much weight should be added to removal of the scheme, because hopefully the scheme will be successful and it will last a very long time. And maybe we'll all be gone by the time it needs to be removed, and there'll be some other spectacular solution available. But what I was going to suggest is, if we do go to the vote for refusal, is that we ask the applicant to come back with other options as part of that refusal, and that this application should form part of that refusal. If they come back with another option and the other option opens even more complicated policy issues, we could still be in the same position, and by then Brookshine may have closed the road by then. And of course I think I want to say that while everyone wants to protect that coastline, as much as anything, vehicular access is hugely important to the protection of that coastline, because if the public can't use it, then what we won't get to enjoy it unless we're walkers or cyclists. But the strategic route that, as Councillor Critchin has mentioned, is hugely important. It will put pressure on other towns and villages, probably Newport actually. So I'm really, I really want to make sure that if we go to the vote on refusal, that I can make the right decision, and that we don't lose this. If this is the only opportunity to save that part of the road, that it can be brought back with other options, so we can consider maybe more than one option. I know that might sound like an unusual and complicated way to take this, but I'm sure that our officers can maybe find a way to build that into refusal, whether that's necessary or not. But I think I don't think anyone here is against saving the military road. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't think anyone's against it, but this might be the only choice. That's the point. And that is what we don't know at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Price. Well, I suppose it's certainly within the gift of committee to defer potentially, but I'm going to invite Councillor Andre to speak, and then Mr. Bolter is going to address some of the concerns you've raised, Councillor Price. Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chair. It's really a point of clarification that's come up. So the reason that this application has come before this committee is because there is an involvement, for want of a better word, of the Isle of Wight Council. So if we uphold the officer's recommendation to refuse as a separate issue, can we not invite applications, further applications, in respect of the saving effectively of Military Road?
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Apologies.
Councillor Stewart, then Councillor Bacon. Councillor Stewart, please.
I felt this was very clear. It's a planning application. it's not a very good plan application, even though the engineering is lovely and there's a lot of work gone into it. However, this is the planning application in front of us. We all want to keep the military road. I certainly damn well do. All my residents, bar one, want it. There is no argument about that, but that is outside this arena. This arena is this application. I don't think this application can go ahead, full stop.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Bacon.
Thank you, Chair. I would concur with what Councillor Stewart has just said, but I'm struggling with what Councillor Price is putting forward. But two factors have been clearly mentioned in the information before us, that there are at least two other options. Councillor Stewart, when speaking as local member, referred to three options, and this one being the least favourable. So we know there are two other options, and we know in relation to rerouting, again, it was mentioned at some point, that the relevant landowner is in agreement to a potential rerouting on their land. So I'm struggling with Councillor Price's approach, and fundamentally I do share the view that we're considering this application. This application is not a good application. It will cause appalling damage environmentally, ecologically, to habitats and so on. And I think we should be dealing with it fairly swiftly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bacon. I think certainly whilst I acknowledge the issues that Councillor Price has raised, I would also reiterate the point that we do need to judge this application purely within the fairly narrow confines of this application. But I'm going to invite Mr. Bolter to speak to some of the concerns that Councillor Price has raised. Mr. Bolter.
Thank you, Chair. And if by doing so, hopefully I'll pick up on a couple of the other points raised by the councillors as well. I think what I would advise councillors is that if ultimately the decision this evening is to refuse for the reasons given in the report, then which is on, so there are three reasons for refusal, as I'm sure you'll be aware, listed on page 113 of the report, then it will be clear to the applicant that the issues that they will need to address then should they wish to gain a consent. So this then follows into the question from Councillor Andre about can we invite further applications. I would suggest that the LPA wouldn't necessarily need to invite further applications per se, but the council as the Highways Authority would obviously be perfectly entitled to submit further applications that seek to address the issues and of course the planning areas of concern that the committee have articulated. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bolter. Councillor Price, as you had raised that as a signal of concern for yourself, do you wish to propose an amendment to the motion that is currently on the floor as made by Councillor Quirk, seconded by Councillor Andre, to refuse the application?
No, I don't think so. I think at the end of the day, it's just a matter of choice whether I can, you know, I may not be on this council if another application comes back, that none of us may be. You know, while I totally respect the fact that we're looking at the application in front of us, I've been on this committee for over 10 years now, and I fully understand that. You know, I don't feel comfortable that there will be another option come forward. If there is, great, I'll vote for it. If it's the right option and it's before us as a committee. But on that basis, that this being the only option, it is the application that's in front of us, it's the only option at this stage, I'm afraid I will vote against refusal, and that's with a heavy heart, because I actually, I can see a lot of work's gone into this. I can see that the planning officers have found it very hard to make this work, because it simply doesn't. So that might sound like a contradiction in itself, but voting against saving this part of the military road, which was only closed a few years ago and had traffic lights on it for 3.5 years, which, you know, I'm sure costs a lot of money. You know, we could be looking at this road closed next year, and with no decision made on how it could be rescued. So I think with a heavy heart, I'm afraid I would be voting against the recommendation to refuse. So
thank you, Councillor Price. Are there any other comments from the committee? I think I would simply reiterate Mr. Bolter's point, and then indeed Councillor Bacon's point, that there are other options available. I think we do need to be somewhat narrow in what we are determining here. I would certainly suggest that probably many members of the public feel disappointed that this hasn't been at a level that officers have been able to recommend an approval of it. And I think that point has been well made, and I no doubt the members of the press will perhaps take that away as well. But Councillor Price, you had your hand up. Councillor Price.
Yeah, I think I just want to add to that I think we should have had a debate about this. We nearly went straight to a vote, which I don't remember that happening very many times, but we nearly went straight to a vote on something that will be perceived by our residents as something that deserved a debate. So, you know, that this should have gone straight to the vote, and that it required little debate, I think is a worrying thing to have heard. But anyway, I'm sure that hasn't made me popular tonight, but thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Price. Well, I note your concern. I think this is, for my determination, essentially one where, as Councillor Bacon has highlighted, because of the nature of that particular paragraph and the way in which this conflicts with certain habitats regulations and the way in which the committee is given the power and the discretion to vote. But I certainly do take your point, and we'll take that on board, Councillor Bacon.
I think it should be said, Chair, and thank you for letting me come in, that absolutely there should be a debate, but it's not a debate about this application. It's a much wider debate to be had in another room on another day, which should have been had well before now, frankly. But I think that point ought to be made.
Thank you, Councillor Bacon. Any other comments? In which case the motion on the floor is made by Councillor Quirk, seconded by Councillor Andre to refuse this application. All those in favour of refusal?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
And against?
1, 2.
Any abstentions?
None.
Thank you. In which case this is refused. Splendid. We will move then straight on to members' question time. We've received a written question from Councillor Spink, which I believe Mr. Bolter, Mr. Chick is going to read out, if you would, the question and the response first. Thank you, Mr. Chick.
Make sure I use a speaker. I'm normally too quiet anyway. So the question relates to what was going to be item 1 on this agenda, which is now withdrawn from the agenda, and it relates to comments made by Natural England on the council's appropriate assessment, or habitat regulations assessment, I should say. So question 1, the last sentence of paragraph 6.6 of the report to the committee states Natural England have ratified the council's appropriate assessment in relation to nitrate neutrality. Question: please will you identify the source of the above as it conflicts with Natural England's statement published on the planning portal on the 6th of October. So the officer's answer to this, which we provide in writing as well, is the comment provided by Natural England on the 5th of October 2023 was in response to a habitats regulation assessment compiled by officers and sent to Natural England for comment. The HRA assessed 2 issues, the first being the impact of wastewater on designated sites as a result of nutrients loading, and the second, recreational disturbance on designated sites. The Natural England comment confirms that in relation to wastewater issue, based on the provided calculations, Natural England would agree that the proposal would not lead to an increase in nutrient discharge to the designated sites. Comment also confirmed that the Planning Authority has measures in place to manage potential recreational disturbance impacts through the agreed strategic solution that they consider to be ecologically sound, they being Natural England. Comment includes sensible precautionary statements that require the Planning Authority to be certain of the evidence submitted. That's the evidence submitted by the applicant. Key issue for the wastewater impact related to the pre- and post-development calculations relating to nitrates inputs. The applicant based their calculations on the use of the land for dairy farming. Noting this comment by Natural England, the LPA contacted the applicant's planning agent on the 6th of October, the day after the Natural England comment was received, and asked that information be provided to demonstrate that the land use was dairy cattle grazing. The agent was of the opinion that dairy cattle had been grazed, and on the 10th of October provided grazing licenses provided to the tenant farmer, provided those to the planning authority, I should say, and explained in a phone call that dairy cattle were grazed on the land. On the 12th of October, officers were copied into a third-party objector's email to Natural England, which included a document entitled Nutrient Neutrality Document. This document has still not been sent directly to the planning authority. However, officers reviewed its contents and noted that it referred to the use of the land being known locally to be for beef cattle, not dairy cattle. There is a difference in the nitrates loading applied to the two types of grazing. As a result, officers contacted the applicant's planning agent on the same day, raising concerns that the nitrates calculations may be incorrect, and inviting confirmation the land was in fact used for dairy grazing or beef grazing. On the 13th of October, the planning agent called the case officer, which is me, and explained that the site may well have been used for beef grazing. At that point, the agent was advised that the appropriate assessment would now need to be rerun, and the agent confirmed that the application should be withdrawn from the planning committee agenda for October, so that further investigations could be undertaken. In light of the above, it is considered that there is not a conflict between the Natural England comment and the approach of the LPA. The second question, it refers to a direct quote from Natural England's comments sent to planning officers, which are in the HRA assessment that officers have undertaken. So it says the appropriate assessment states under the subheading Summary of Natural England's comments, your appropriate assessment dated the 29th of September 2023 concludes that your authority is able to ascertain the proposal will not result in adverse effects on the integrity of any sites in question, those being designated sites in the Solent. Having considered the assessment and the measures proposed to mitigate for all identified adverse effects that could potentially occur as a result of the proposal, Natural England advises that we concur with the assessment conclusions. Regarding nutrient impacts, our advice is provided on the assumption that the drainage strategy is technically accurate. We have not been able to provide specialist advice on the drainage elements itself. Also, that it is appropriate to use the dairy land use figure for the current baseline, and we have provided more detail on this in our planning response. So the question is, please will you identify the source of the above as it conflicts with Natural England's statement published on the planning portal on the 6th of the 10th. So the above is from, our answer is the above is from an email from Natural England dated the 5th of October, to form part of their comments to the case officer on the council's draft appropriate assessment. So they are directly copy and pasted into our appropriate assessment, which is online. In terms of the drainage assessment, this relates to surface water drainage, which is not related to the conclusions regarding nutrient neutrality. Natural England's role is related to biodiversity and not flood risk. That role rests with the local planning authority in its role as lead local flood authority. The conclusions set out within the appropriate assessment of the HRA that the development would be nitrates neutral related solely to the nitrates input of the development site and not the impacts of overspills from the sewage system in Bembridge. Officers and Natural England both agree that at the current time, the extent of impact from overspills on designated sites cannot be robustly assessed. In light of the above, it is considered that there is not a conflict between the Natural England comment and the approach of the LPA.
Thank you, Mr. Chick. Any additional questions, Councillor Spink?
I don't want to take up the committee's time now. I'm not sure that my question has been answered directly, but I think it's more appropriate that I follow this up in writing with the case officer. And my simple request this afternoon is, may I see the email referred to by Natural England of the 5th of October, which has not been put on the planning portal.
Thank you, Councillor Spink. Mr. Chick.
Yes, that's absolutely fine. I can send it to you, councillor Spink. As I said, it's directly verbatim copied into our appropriate assessment at the bottom. So the summary there is exactly that email, and that's followed up by the Natcheringham comment, which is online. But yes, I can share that email.
Thank you, Mr. Chick. Thank you, councillor Spink. I'll make sure that that written response is also circulated to all members of Planning Committee. I anticipate this may be something that will be ventilated in future meetings. Are there any additional questions for members' question time? In which case, I will draw Planning Committee on Tuesday, the 17th of October to a close. Thank you very much.